Most people don't fail because they're stupid. They fail because they refuse to learn. Every mistake you make is either a lesson or a sentence you repeat for years. Winners don't avoid failure, they dissect it. This audiobook will show you why the most successful people, industries, and systems in the world study their errors obsessively, while everyone else hides, blames, and repeats the same mistakes. If you're ready to stop defending your ego and start upgrading your results, listen carefully. This will change how you think forever. Most people are not trapped by circumstances. They are trapped by their ego. Read that again. Most people are not afraid of failing. They are afraid of being exposed, afraid of being wrong, afraid of admitting they misjudged, miscalculated, or misunderstood. That's the trap. You fear being wrong more than staying stuck. And as long as that remains true, nothing changes. Here's the brutal truth. Your ego does not protect you. It limits you. Every time you defend yourself instead of examining yourself, you delay your growth. Every time you explain instead of evaluate, you repeat the same mistake. That's the cost. Ego turns mistakes into secrets. Secrets you hide. Excuses you justify. Stories you tell yourself to feel better. But growth doesn't come from stories. Growth comes from data. Say it with me. Ego blocks data. Data creates growth. That's the key. When your ego is in control, you don't learn, you rationalize, you justify, you blame timing, people, luck, systems, childhood, society, anything except your decisions. And here's the danger. Blame feels productive, but it teaches you nothing. You have a choice. Protect your ego or upgrade your results. You can't do both. Let's be clear. High performers are not more confident because they're always right. They're confident because they're willing to be wrong fast. They don't hide mistakes. They expose them. They don't defend bad decisions. They dissect them. Because they understand something most people never learn. Mistakes are information, but only if you're humble enough to look at them. Ego hates feedback. Feedback threatens identity. And most people confuse what they did with who they are. That confusion ruins lives. It's not about being flawed, it's about being disciplined. Repeat it. It's not about ego, it's about discipline. Discipline to sit with discomfort. Discipline to admit I was wrong. Discipline to ask what actually happened here. That's where growth lives. Let me tell you how ego operates. Ego speaks fast. Ego interrupts. Ego reacts emotionally. Ego needs to win every conversation. Ego needs to look competent at all times. And the price of looking competent is never becoming competent. That's the trade most people make without realizing it. You don't need their permission to improve. You don't need approval to self-correct. You don't need validation to admit a mistake. But your ego will convince you otherwise. Your ego will say, don't admit that, you'll look weak. Don't question yourself, trust your instincts. Don't revisit that decision, move on. And every time you listen, you repeat the cycle. Same habits, same outcomes, different year. That's not bad luck, that's unexamined behavior. Here's the rule you must adopt if you want to change your life. Every outcome is feedback, not punishment, not validation, feedback. Good outcome, study it. Bad outcome, study it harder. That's the discipline. But ego hates discipline because discipline requires honesty, and honesty hurts at first. Short-term pain, long-term power. Most people choose the opposite. Short-term comfort, long-term regret. You have a choice. Let's get practical. From this moment forward, you stop asking, why did this happen to me? That question is useless. You start asking, what did I do or not do that produced this result? That's the shift. No emotion, no drama, no self-attack, just data. What decision led here? What assumption was wrong? What signal did I ignore? What pattern is repeating?
That's how you turn mistakes into leverage. And understand this, being wrong does not make you weak. Refusing to learn makes you fragile. Fragile people avoid truth. Strong people seek it. Say it again. Ego blocks data. Data creates growth. That's not motivational, that's mechanical. Growth is not magic, it's correction. And correction only happens when you remove ego from the equation. Here's another hard truth. The more intelligent you are, the more dangerous your ego becomes. Because intelligence gives you better excuses, better explanations, better rationalizations. You don't deny reality, you reinterpret it. That's why smart people stay stuck for years. They can explain everything except why nothing changes. You don't need better explanations, you need better adjustments. That's the key. Starting today, you adopt a new identity. You are not the person who is always right. You are the person who is always learning. That identity frees you, because now mistakes are not threats, they're tools. Now feedback is not an attack, it's assistance. Now failure is not embarrassment, it's instruction. And once you see mistakes that way, you stop fearing them. You stop hiding, you stop defending, you stop performing, and you start improving. Here's your first assignment. Tonight, replay one recent failure, one conversation, one decision, one missed opportunity. No excuses. Ask yourself 3 questions. What actually happened? What did I assume that wasn't true? What will I do differently next time? Write it down. That's discipline. Not motivation, not confidence, not inspiration. Discipline. Because remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Your ego will resist this process. That's normal. Growth always feels like a threat to the old version of you. Let it feel uncomfortable. Because comfort is expensive, and ego is the most expensive habit you have. You have a choice. Keep protecting your ego and pay with years of stagnation, or expose it and pay with temporary discomfort. One makes you feel better, the other makes you better. Decide. Because this audiobook is not about feeling good, it's about getting better. You've now removed the first obstacle to growth. You stopped defending yourself. Now you're ready for the next step. You've learned to stop protecting your ego. Now let's talk about what separates failure from progress.
Failure is not who you are. Failure is something that happened. Those two ideas are not the same. But most people confuse them, and that confusion destroys progress. They fail once, and suddenly they are a failure. They make one bad decision, and suddenly they believe they are bad at decisions. That's the trap. When you turn failure into identity, you stop learning. When you treat failure as data, you start winning. That's the difference between people who improve and people who repeat the same year forever. Say this slowly. This happened. Now what does it teach? That's the key. High performers don't ask, what does this say about me? They ask, what does this tell me? Because they understand something critical. Your identity must be stable. Your methods must be flexible. Most people do the opposite. They protect their methods and attack their identity. They say, I'm just not good at this. I've always been like this. That's just who I am. No, that's who you decided to be because you refuse to analyze the data. You have a choice. You can let failure label you, or you can let failure train you. You cannot do both. Let's get this straight. Failure is feedback. Failure is information. Failure is correction, but only if you stop taking it personally. Emotion clouds analysis. Identity attachment blocks learning. That's why this chapter matters. If you don't separate who you are from what went wrong, every setback becomes a threat instead of a lesson. And threatened people don't improve. They defend, they explain, they avoid. Winners don't do that. Winners zoom out. They say, this happened, not I am this. They say, that approach failed, not I failed as a person. That mental separation is power. Repeat it. This happened. Now what does it teach? That phrase will save you years. Here's why most people resist this idea. Because tying failure to identity feels logical, it feels emotional, it feels real, but it's wrong. A bad result does not mean you are bad. It means one of four things happened. You lacked information, you misjudged risk, you executed poorly, or the environment changed. None of those define your worth. They define your adjustment. That's the key. Let me be clear and direct. If failure makes you emotional, you won't learn from it. If it makes you defensive, you won't correct it. If it makes you ashamed, you'll hide it, and hidden failures repeat. That's not psychology, that's mechanics. So starting now, you must adopt a rule. No self-labeling after failure, ever. No, I'm terrible at this. No, I always mess this up. No, I'm not built for this. That language is poison. It turns temporary mistakes into permanent ceilings. Instead, you use neutral language. This approach didn't work. This assumption was wrong. This decision produced this result. No drama, no identity attack, just data. Because remember, it's not about being flawless, it's about being disciplined. Disciplined in how you interpret outcomes, disciplined in how you respond, disciplined in how you learn. Most people quit because they feel like failures. High performers continue because they feel informed. That's the difference. You don't rise because you avoid mistakes. You rise because you convert mistakes into instruction. Say it one last time. This happened. Now what does it teach? That phrase will save you years. Here's why most people resist this idea. Because tying failure to identity feels logical, it feels emotional, it feels real, but it's wrong. A bad result does not mean you are bad. It means one of four things happened. You lacked information, you misjudged risk, you executed poorly, or the environment changed. None of those define your worth. They define your adjustment. That's the key. Let me be clear and direct. If failure makes you emotional, you won't learn from it. If it makes you defensive, you won't correct it. If it makes you ashamed, you'll hide it, and hidden failures repeat. That's not psychology, that's mechanics. So starting now, you must adopt a rule. No self-labeling after failure, ever. No, I'm terrible at this. No, I always mess this up. No, I'm not built for this. That language is poison. It turns temporary mistakes into permanent ceilings. Instead, you use neutral language. This approach didn't work. This assumption was wrong. This decision produced this result. No drama, no identity attack, just data. Because remember, it's not about being flawless, it's about being disciplined. Disciplined in how you interpret outcomes, disciplined in how you respond, disciplined in how you learn. Most people quit because they feel like failures. High performers continue because they feel informed. That's the difference. You don't rise because you avoid mistakes. You rise because you convert mistakes into instruction. Say it one last time. This happened. Now what does it teach? That phrase will save you years. Here's why most people resist this idea. Because tying failure to identity feels logical, it feels emotional, it feels real, but it's wrong. A bad result does not mean you are bad. It means one of four things happened. You lacked information, you misjudged risk, you executed poorly, or the environment changed. None of those define your worth. They define your adjustment. That's the key. Let me be clear and direct. If failure makes you emotional, you won't learn from it. If it makes you defensive, you won't correct it. If it makes you ashamed, you'll hide it, and hidden failures repeat. That's not psychology, that's mechanics. So starting now, you must adopt a rule. No self-labeling after failure, ever. No, I'm terrible at this. No, I always mess this up. No, I'm not built for this. That language is poison. It turns temporary mistakes into permanent ceilings. Instead, you use neutral language. This approach didn't work. This assumption was wrong. This decision produced this result. No drama, no identity attack, just data. Because remember, it's not about being flawless, it's about being disciplined. Disciplined in how you interpret outcomes, disciplined in how you respond, disciplined in how you learn.
Most people quit because they feel like failures. High performers continue because they feel informed. That's the difference. You don't rise because you avoid mistakes. You rise because you convert mistakes into instruction. Say it one last time. This happened. Now what does it teach? That phrase will save you years. Here's why most people resist this idea. Because tying failure to identity feels logical, it feels emotional, it feels real, but it's wrong. A bad result does not mean you are bad. It means one of four things happened. You lacked information, you misjudged risk, you executed poorly, or the environment changed. None of those define your worth. They define your adjustment. That's the key. Let me be clear and direct. If failure makes you emotional, you won't learn from it. If it makes you defensive, you won't correct it. If it makes you ashamed, you'll hide it. And hidden failures repeat. That's not psychology, that's mechanics. So starting now, you must adopt a rule. No self-labeling after failure, ever. No, I'm terrible at this. No, I always mess this up. No, I'm not built for this. That language is poison. It turns temporary mistakes into permanent ceilings. Instead, you use neutral language. This approach didn't work. This assumption was wrong. This decision produced this result. No drama, no identity attack, just data. Because remember, it's not about being flawless, it's about being disciplined. Disciplined in how you interpret outcomes, disciplined in how you respond, disciplined in how you learn. Most people quit because they feel like failures. High performers continue because they feel informed. That's the difference. You don't rise because you avoid mistakes. You rise because you convert mistakes into instruction. Say it one last time. This happened. Now what does it teach? That phrase will save you years. Here's why most people resist this idea. Because tying failure to identity feels logical, it feels emotional, it feels real, but it's wrong. A bad result does not mean you are bad. It means one of four things happened. You lacked information, you misjudged risk, you executed poorly, or the environment changed. None of those define your worth. They define your adjustment. That's the key. Let me be clear and direct. If failure makes you emotional, you won't learn from it. If it makes you defensive, you won't correct it. If it makes you ashamed, you'll hide it. And hidden failures repeat. That's not psychology, that's mechanics. So starting now, you must adopt a rule. No self-labeling after failure, ever. No, I'm terrible at this. No, I always mess this up. No, I'm not built for this. That language is poison. It turns temporary mistakes into permanent ceilings. Instead, you use neutral language. This approach didn't work. This assumption was wrong. This decision produced this result. No drama, no identity attack, just data. Because remember, it's not about being flawless, it's about being disciplined. Disciplined in how you interpret outcomes, disciplined in how you respond, disciplined in how you learn. Most people quit because they feel like failures. High performers continue because they feel informed. That's the difference. You don't rise because you avoid mistakes. You rise because you convert mistakes into instruction. Say it one last time. This happened. Now
Look at aviation, the safest industry in human history. Planes don't stay in the air because pilots are perfect. They stay in the air because mistakes are recorded, analyzed, and shared. Every error, every near miss, every failure, nothing is hidden, nothing is protected by ego. Because aviation understands something most people don't. If you hide mistakes, you repeat them. If you expose mistakes, you eliminate them. Medicine works the same way. When it works well, errors are logged, processes are reviewed, systems are adjusted, not to punish, to prevent repetition. That's the mindset you must adopt for your life. Because personal growth fails for one reason above all others. People bury their errors. They don't review them, they don't record them, they don't analyze them. They move on emotionally, but not strategically. And what you don't examine, you repeat. Say it again. What gets examined gets improved. That phrase is not optional. it's a rule. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your life already has a system. You just didn't design it consciously. Your habits, your reactions, your decision patterns, they operate automatically. And automatic systems don't improve unless they're interrupted. That's why high performers obsess over errors. Not because they enjoy pain, not because they hate themselves, because they respect reality. You have a choice. You can treat mistakes as embarrassing moments to forget or as intelligence reports to study. One leads to stagnation, the other leads to mastery. You cannot improve what you refuse to look at. That's the key. Let's break this down. Successful systems do three things consistently. They capture errors, they analyze patterns, they update behavior. That's it. No emotion, no drama, no ego. Now look at the average person. They do the opposite. They ignore errors, they rationalize patterns, they repeat behavior. Same inputs, same outputs, different year. That's not bad luck, that's an unexamined system. And systems always win. You don't need their permission to run your life like a high-performance system. You don't need approval to review your failures. You don't need validation to admit something isn't working. You have a choice. Most people rely on memory to learn from mistakes. That's a mistake. Memory lies, emotion edits, time distorts. That's why successful systems write things down. Black boxes don't trust feelings, they trust records. And if you want real growth, you need your own black box. Not metaphorically, practically. A place where errors are recorded without judgment. Not to shame yourself, to train yourself. Because remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to review, discipline to reflect, discipline to correct. Here's where people resist. They say, I already know what went wrong. No, you don't. If you did, it wouldn't keep happening. Knowing is not the same as examining. Examination is slow, detailed, uncomfortable. That's why it works. You must start treating your mistakes like a professional investigator, not a critic. No insults, no emotional language, just facts. What happened? What decision led here? What signal did I ignore? What pattern is repeating? Patterns matter more than incidents. One failure is noise, repeated failure is a system problem, and systems must be redesigned. That's the key. Let me say this directly. If you keep making the same mistake, it's not because you're incapable, it's because you haven't built a feedback loop. Feedback loops are how progress compounds. Without them, effort is wasted. Most people think improvement comes from trying harder. It doesn't. It comes from correcting faster. That's why successful systems outperform individuals who rely on motivation. Motivation is inconsistent. Systems are relentless. You need to stop relying on how you feel and start relying on what you track. Track decisions, track outcomes, track errors. Not everything, just what matters. Because what gets examined gets improved. Say it again. Now let's talk about the biggest lie people tell themselves. I'll fix it next time. Next time without analysis is just hope. Hope is not a strategy. Systems don't hope, they prepare. They assume error is inevitable and build processes to catch it early. You must do the same. Here's a rule you adopt from today forward. No mistake is complete until it's reviewed, not mentally, on paper, because paper doesn't lie. Write down what I expected, what actually happened, why there was a gap. That gap is where growth lives. That's the key. This is not about self-criticism, it's about self-mastery. Criticism attacks the person, analysis upgrades the system. And remember, it's not about flaw, it's about discipline. Discipline to look, discipline to log, discipline to learn. Most people want confidence. Confidence comes from knowing you can correct, not from pretending you won't fail. The safest pilots aren't fearless, they're prepared. The best professionals aren't lucky, they're systematic. You must become systematic with yourself, because life doesn't reward intentions, it rewards systems. You have a choice.
You can continue living reactively, or you can build a personal error review system. One leads to repetition, the other leads to exponential growth. And once you start examining errors consistently, something powerful happens. Mistakes stop scaring you. Feedback stops hurting you. Failure stops defining you. Because now, everything is information. You've learned why successful systems obsess over errors. You've learned why hiding mistakes kills growth. Good. Because now that you understand why errors matter, it's time to confront something even more dangerous. Not failure, the need to look competent. You've stopped protecting your ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've learned to examine errors like a system. Now let's talk about the hidden cost of appearances.
Chapter 4. The Danger of Looking Competent. Looking competent feels safe. It feels respectable. It feels powerful. And it's one of the most dangerous habits you can develop. Because looking smart today can cost you success tomorrow. Say it clearly. Short-term pride creates long-term failure. That's the key. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they prioritize appearance over accuracy. They want to look like they know instead of actually knowing. They want certainty instead of truth. And the moment you choose appearance over learning, growth stops. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Competence is quiet. Learning is messy. So people fake competence to avoid the mess. They nod instead of asking questions. They speak instead of listening. They defend instead of investigate. And every time they do that, they trade progress for pride. You have a choice. You can look competent or you can become competent. You cannot do both at the same time. Because becoming competent requires admitting what you don't know, and ego hates that. Let's break this down. The need to look competent shows up in subtle ways. You avoid asking questions. You over-explain simple points. You pretend clarity where there is confusion. You give answers instead of saying, "I don't know." That behavior feels professional. It feels confident. But it's fake confidence. And fake confidence is fragile. The moment reality pushes back, it collapses. That's why people who always look sure often fail quietly. They never updated their understanding. They were too busy performing. Say it again. Short-term pride creates long-term failure. That phrase should make you uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort is where correction begins. High performers don't chase the image of competence. They chase clarity. They're willing to look ignorant in the short term to be dangerous in the long term. They ask questions early. They expose gaps fast. They correct quickly. And because of that, they win later. That's the key. Here's what most people get wrong. They think confidence comes from having answers. It doesn't. Real confidence comes from knowing you can figure things out. And you can't figure things out if you pretend you already have. That's why the smartest people in the room often ask the simplest questions. Not because they're weak, because they're precise. They want truth, not approval. You don't need their permission to ask questions. You don't need validation to say, "I don't understand yet." You don't need approval to admit uncertainty. You have a choice. Protect your image or upgrade your understanding. Now let's talk about certainty. People fake certainty because uncertainty feels threatening. Uncertainty exposes gaps. Gaps expose ego. So instead of saying, "I'm not sure," people say, "I think it's fine. This should work. That's probably good enough." Those phrases are red flags. They signal avoidance, not insight. Certainty without evidence is arrogance. Arrogance blocks feedback. Feedback is how systems improve. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to pause. Discipline to question. Discipline to verify. Here's a rule you must adopt if you want long-term success. Never trust confidence alone. Demand evidence. From yourself, most of all. Confidence feels good. Evidence makes you better. Most people choose feeling good.
High performers choose results. That's the difference. Let me say this directly. Every time you fake certainty, you delay correction. Every time you delay correction, you increase the cost of failure. Small misunderstandings become big mistakes. Minor gaps become major breakdowns, all because you wanted to look competent. Short-term pride, long-term failure. That's the trade. You have a choice. Let's make this practical. Starting now, you replace statements with questions. Instead of saying, "I know this," you ask, "What am I missing?" Instead of saying, "This makes sense," you ask, "Can I explain this clearly?" Instead of saying, "It'll work," you ask, "What could cause it to fail?" Those questions don't weaken you, they sharpen you. They turn assumptions into understanding. That's the key. Here's another hard truth. The more senior you become, the more dangerous the need to look competent gets, because people stop challenging you and you start believing your own certainty. That's how smart people make stupid mistakes. They stopped learning. They confused authority with accuracy. You must never do that. Your title doesn't protect you. Your reputation doesn't protect you. Your past success doesn't protect you. Only continuous learning does. Say it again. Short-term pride creates long-term failure. If you remember nothing else from this chapter, remember that. Now let's talk about behavior you must stop immediately. Stop answering questions you don't understand. Stop agreeing to avoid looking slow. Stop defending ideas you haven't tested. Those habits feel safe. They are not. They make you brittle. Instead, you adopt these behaviors. Pause before responding. Ask clarifying questions. Admit uncertainty early. That's discipline. Not confidence, not charisma. Discipline. Because remember, it's not about being flawless. It's about being disciplined. Disciplined enough to look unpolished while learning. Disciplined enough to be wrong in public. Disciplined enough to delay ego gratification. Most people can't do that. That's why most people plateau. They stopped learning the moment they started performing. You won't make that mistake. You have a choice. You can perform competence or you can build competence. One is loud, the other is lethal. And here's the payoff. When you stop trying to look competent, something powerful happens. Feedback starts flowing, errors surface faster, correction becomes natural, and growth accelerates. Because now you're not protecting an image, you're upgrading a system. That's what winners do. You've learned why ego blocks data. You've learned why failure is information. You've learned why systems obsess over errors. And now you understand the danger of looking competent. Good. Because once you stop performing, you're finally ready to listen. And listening is the gateway to improvement. You've dropped the mask. Now it's time to use the most powerful tool available to you.
Chapter 5. Feedback is the only real teacher. Talent doesn't teach you. Experience doesn't teach you. Time doesn't teach you. Feedback teaches you. And without it, progress is impossible. Say it clearly. Feedback hurts fast. Ignoring it hurts forever. That's the key. Most people think they're learning because time is passing. They're not. They're just repeating behavior without correction. And repetition without feedback doesn't create mastery. It creates habits, good or bad. Feedback is the only thing that tells you whether your actions are working. Without it, you are guessing. And guessing feels comfortable until reality shows up. You have a choice. You can seek feedback early and feel discomfort now, or avoid it and pay a permanent price later. There is no third option. Here's the truth most people avoid. Comfort delays correction. When you're comfortable, you don't question. When you don't question, you don't adjust. When you don't adjust, you stagnate. That's not theory, that's mechanics. High performers are not more gifted. They are more exposed. They put themselves in positions where feedback is unavoidable. Deadlines, metrics, standards. They don't wait to feel ready. They let feedback make them ready. That's the difference. Say it again. Feedback hurts fast. Ignoring it hurts forever. That phrase should guide your decisions. Now let's address something important. Not all feedback is equal. You don't take advice from everyone. You don't react to noise. But you do pay attention to patterns. If multiple sources point to the same issue, it's real. If results repeat, it's real. If reality keeps correcting you, it's real. Ignoring patterns is arrogance, and arrogance is expensive. You don't need their permission to take feedback seriously. You don't need approval to change your approach. You don't need validation to improve quietly. You have a choice. Most people protect their comfort. High performers protect their learning. Comfort delays correction. Correction accelerates growth. That's the trade. Let's bring this home. Every level you want to reach demands a higher tolerance for feedback. More exposure, more correction, more adjustment. If you want more success, you must accept more feedback. There is no shortcut. Because feedback is the only real teacher. Not books, not motivation, not confidence. Feedback. And once you commit to it, something changes. You stop guessing. You stop hoping. You start progressing. You've learned to stop protecting your ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've learned to examine errors. You've learned the danger of looking competent. And now you understand the power of feedback. Good. Because feedback only works when you're willing to take ownership. And that brings us to the next obstacle most people never overcome. Blame. You're ready for it.
Chapter 6. Blame is the enemy of growth. Blame feels good. That's why it's dangerous. Blame gives you relief without responsibility, comfort without correction, explanation without improvement. And the moment blame enters the conversation, learning stops. Say it clearly. Blame explains nothing. Ownership fixes everything. That's the key. Every time something goes wrong, your mind looks for a target, a person, a situation, a system, bad luck, bad timing. Blame is automatic. Ownership is deliberate, and growth only comes from deliberate action. Here's the truth most people never face. You can either be right or you can get better. Blame helps you feel right. Ownership helps you improve. You cannot do both. You have a choice. Blame is seductive because it removes discomfort. It tells you it wasn't your fault. And emotionally, that feels safe. But safety is expensive because blame shuts down learning instantly. The moment you blame, your brain stops asking questions. No analysis, no reflection, no correction, just justification. And justified people don't grow. Say it again. Blame explains nothing. Ownership fixes everything. Ownership does not mean self-attack. It does not mean guilt. It does not mean shame. Ownership means control. It means saying, what part of this was within my influence? Not responsibility for everything, responsibility for something. And that something is where power lives. Because you can't change what you don't own. That's the key. Most people misunderstand ownership. They think ownership means admitting fault publicly. They think it makes them weak. The opposite is true. Ownership is strength. Blame is weakness pretending to be confidence. Blame says, there's nothing I could have done. Ownership says, there's something I can adjust. One keeps you stuck. The other moves you forward. You don't need their permission to take ownership. You don't need validation to admit influence. You don't need approval to change your approach. You have a choice. Let's get very clear about how blame operates. Blame sounds logical. It uses facts selectively. The market was bad. They didn't support me. I didn't have the right tools. No one told me. All of those might be partially true and completely useless. Because even when blame is accurate, it's unproductive. It gives you no next action. Ownership always does. Ownership asks, what can I do differently next time even if circumstances stay the same? That question creates leverage. Blame destroys it. That's the key. Let me say this plainly. If you want growth, blame must be removed from your internal language, not out loud, internally. The stories you tell yourself matter more than what you say publicly. If your inner dialogue is blame-based, you will stagnate quietly. Here's the rule you adopt starting today. No blame without a correction. If you catch yourself blaming, you must immediately follow it with an ownership question. What could I have done better? What did I fail to prepare for? What signal did I ignore? If you can't answer, you're not thinking hard enough, because there is always something. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to look inward. Discipline to resist emotional relief. Discipline to choose progress over pride. Blame protects ego. Ownership builds competence. High performers understand this early. That's why they improve faster. They don't waste energy assigning fault. They invest energy making adjustments. Let's talk about teams, careers, and relationships. Blame poisons all of them. In teams, blame kills trust. In careers, blame kills growth. In relationships, blame kills connection. Because blame is defensive. Ownership is constructive. When you own your part, even a small part, you shift the entire dynamic. You move from victim to operator. That's the key. Now let's address the fear. People fear ownership because they think it means accepting consequences. Here's the truth. Consequences already exist. Ownership just gives you control over future outcomes. Avoiding ownership does not remove consequences, it repeats them. That's why blame feels safe today and dangerous tomorrow. Short-term relief, long-term stagnation. Say it again. Blame explains nothing. Ownership fixes everything. This is not philosophy, it's mechanics. Let's make this practical. When something fails, you do not ask who messed up. You ask what failed in the process. When a result disappoints, you do not ask why did this happen to me. You ask what decision led here. When someone lets you down, you do not ask why are they like this. You ask what expectation did I fail to communicate or verify. Those questions don't weaken you, they empower you, because they lead to action. Action creates progress. Here's another hard truth. Blame makes you dependent. If someone else is always at fault, someone else must change first. Ownership makes you independent. You can act immediately. That's power. You have a choice. Wait for others to change or change your approach now. One keeps you waiting, the other keeps you moving. That's the key. Now let's address a critical distinction. Ownership is not accepting unfair treatment. Ownership is not excusing others. Ownership is strategic. You can still hold others accountable, but you don't outsource your growth. You control what you control. That's discipline. And discipline beats fairness every time. Life is not fair, but it is responsive. It responds to action. Blame is passive. Ownership is active. Say it again. Blame explains nothing. Ownership fixes everything. If you want to know whether someone will succeed long-term, watch how they talk about failure. Do they explain it, or do they extract lessons from it? Do they name villains, or do they name adjustments? That tells you everything. And now it should tell you something about yourself. Because from this point forward, blame is no longer an option. You've removed ego. You've reframed failure. You've examined errors. You've embraced feedback. And now you've learned to replace blame with ownership. Good. Because ownership unlocks the next level of growth. Once you stop blaming, you start noticing something else. Tiny mistakes, small signals, early warnings. And those small things matter more than big failures. That's where real mastery begins. You've learned why blame kills growth. You've learned how ownership creates leverage. Now it's time to talk about the mistakes people ignore until it's too late. Chapter 7. Small errors become big disasters. Big failures are never sudden. They are slow, quiet, patient. They begin as small errors no one wants to address. Say it clearly. Small errors whisper before they scream. That's the key. Most disasters don't announce themselves. They hint, they signal, they warn. And most people ignore those warnings. Why? Because small errors feel harmless. They don't hurt enough. They don't embarrass you yet. They don't force action. So you delay correction. And delay is expensive. You have a choice. Correct small problems early or pay for big problems later. There is no third option. Here's the truth people don't want to hear. Every major collapse you've seen, in careers, in relationships, in health, in finances, it started with something minor. A habit ignored, a standard lowered, a boundary crossed once, a warning rationalized. No explosion, just erosion. That's how failure really works. Say it again. Small errors whisper before they scream. Whispers are easy to ignore. That's why they're dangerous. High performers understand this. They don't wait for pain to force change. They respond to signals. Low performers wait for consequences. That's the difference. Let's be direct. If you only act when things become painful, you are reactive. Reactive people are always behind. Proactive people act when things are still small. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness. It's about discipline. Discipline to notice. Discipline to correct. Discipline to act early. Here's how small errors operate. They show up as excuses. It's just this once. It's not a big deal. I'll fix it later. It hasn't caused problems yet. Those phrases are red flags. They are the language of delay. And delay compounds. A missed workout becomes a missed week. A late payment becomes debt. A small lie becomes broken trust. A minor shortcut becomes a habit. And habits decide outcomes. You don't wake up one day with a disaster. You build it quietly. You have a choice. Ignore the whisper or listen before it screams. Most people wait for screaming because it demands action, but by then, options are limited. Early correction is power. Late correction is damage control. That's the key. Let's talk about compounding. People understand compounding when it comes to money. They ignore it everywhere else. Small actions repeated daily shape your future more than big actions done occasionally. The same is true for errors. A small mistake repeated becomes a system failure, and systems fail catastrophically, not gradually. That's why successful systems obsess over small deviations. They don't tolerate almost right. They don't normalize good enough, because they know tolerance today becomes disaster tomorrow. You must adopt the same mindset. Here's a rule you live by from now on. Anything you tolerate, you train. If you tolerate lateness, you train unreliability. If you tolerate sloppy work, you train mediocrity. If you tolerate emotional reactions, you train instability. Training happens whether you like it or not. The question is what you're training. That's the key. You don't need their permission to raise your standards. You don't need approval to correct small things. You don't need validation to act early. You have a choice. Now, let's address why people ignore small errors. Because small errors don't threaten identity. Big failures do. So people wait until the mistake is undeniable, but by then, damage is done. This is why discipline matters. Discipline acts before motivation. Discipline acts before emotion. Discipline acts before urgency. That's why disciplined people look calm in crises. They handled problems when they were still manageable. Say it again. Small errors whisper before they scream. Here's a practical shift you must make. Stop asking, is this a big problem? Start asking, if I repeat this for 1 year, what happens? That question exposes danger early. One late night doesn't ruin health.
1 year of late nights does. One ignored conversation doesn't ruin a relationship. 1 year of avoidance does. One financial shortcut doesn't destroy stability. 1 year of shortcuts does. That's how compounding works, and that's why early correction is the secret advantage. High performers don't wait for certainty. They respond to patterns. They don't need 10 warnings. 1 is enough. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being disciplined. Disciplined enough to correct when it's uncomfortable. Disciplined enough to act without drama. Disciplined enough to fix small things quietly. Now, let's talk about pride. Pride tells you small errors don't matter. Pride tells you you can handle it later. Pride tells you it will somehow resolve itself. Pride is lying. Reality doesn't negotiate. It compounds. That's the key. Let me be clear. If you wait for motivation to fix small problems, you will never fix them. Small problems don't generate motivation. They generate inconvenience. And inconvenience is easy to ignore. Discipline doesn't wait for motivation. It responds to standards. Your standards determine your future, not your intentions. You have a choice. Lower standards and feel comfortable now, or enforce standards and feel uncomfortable briefly. One creates quiet decline, the other creates long-term dominance. Now, here's your assignment. Identify one small error you've been ignoring. One habit, one behavior, one pattern. Not the biggest problem, the one you keep excusing. Correct it immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Because action delayed becomes action denied. And remember, small errors whisper before they scream. If you listen early, correction is easy. If you wait, correction is painful. You choose the price. Early discipline or late regret. That's the trade. You've learned how ego hides mistakes. You've learned how failure teaches. You've learned how systems improve. You've embraced feedback. You've replaced blame with ownership. And now you understand the power of early correction. Good, because once you stop ignoring small errors, something else becomes obvious. Not all mistakes come from ignorance. Some come from experience misused. And that's what we need to talk about next. You've handled the small things. Now, let's confront a bigger illusion.
Chapter 8. Why experience alone doesn't make you better. Experience is overrated. Time passes, years stack up, and people assume improvement happened automatically. It didn't. Repeating the same mistake for 10 years isn't experience, it's stagnation. Say it clearly. Experience without analysis is useless. That's the key. Most people confuse exposure with progress. They think doing something longer makes them better at it. It doesn't. Doing something thoughtlessly for years just makes bad habits permanent, and permanent mistakes are expensive. You have a choice. You can age, or you can improve. Time will move either way. Only one of those paths produces mastery. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Experience teaches nothing by itself. Reflection does. If you don't pause to examine what happened, why it happened, and what to change, time becomes irrelevant. 10 years of unexamined experience equals 1 year repeated 10 times. Same errors, same outcomes, different calendar. That's not growth. That's a loop. Say it again. Experience without analysis is useless. High performers understand this early. They don't ask, how long have I been doing this? They ask, what have I learned from doing this? Length of time impresses amateurs. Quality of reflection impresses reality. That's the key. Let's be blunt. If experience alone made people better, everyone would be exceptional by 40. They're not. Why? Because most people never stop to analyze. They stay busy. They stay occupied. They stay tired, but they don't get better. Busy is not productive. Experienced is not skilled. Skill comes from correction, and correction only comes from reflection. You don't need their permission to slow down and think. You don't need validation to question your habits. You don't need approval to admit you've been repeating patterns. You have a choice. You can defend your years, or you can upgrade your results. Now let's talk about the lie people tell themselves. I've been doing this a long time. That statement often hides complacency. Longevity without learning is not a credential. It's a warning sign. It means you survived, not that you evolved. Survival keeps you alive. Learning moves you forward. That's the difference. Here's how experience turns into stagnation. You stop asking questions. You trust instinct without checking results. You assume familiarity equals competence, and slowly, quietly, performance plateaus. You become predictable, rigid, outdated, and because you're experienced, no one challenges you. That's dangerous. Say it again. Experience without analysis is useless. Experience should make you curious, not comfortable. Curiosity keeps you sharp, comfort makes you slow, and slowness is punished by reality. Let me be clear. If you're not reviewing your decisions, you are not gaining experience. You are collecting memories. Memories don't improve performance. Lessons do, and lessons require reflection. That's the key. Here's a rule you must adopt. No experience counts until it's reviewed. Not mentally, not casually, deliberately. What worked? What didn't? Why? If you can't answer those questions, the experience taught you nothing. You just passed time, and time is expensive. Because time passes whether you learn or not. You have a choice. Now let's talk about why people resist reflection. Because reflection exposes patterns, and patterns expose responsibility. If you see the same mistake repeating, you can't claim ignorance anymore. Now you're accountable, and accountability scares people. So they stay busy instead. Busy feels productive. Reflection feels uncomfortable, but discomfort is the price of growth. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to pause, discipline to think, discipline to adjust. Most people want results without reflection. That's not how mastery works. Mastery is built in the quiet moments after action, the debrief, the review, the correction. That's where skill is forged. Here's a practical shift you must make. Stop ending days with distraction. End them with reflection. 5 minutes. What decision mattered today? What result did it produce? What will I do differently tomorrow? That's it. Simple, relentless. That practice separates amateurs from professionals. Not talent, not luck. Reflection. Say it again. Experience without analysis is useless. Now let's address something important. Experience can accelerate learning, but only when paired with humility. The moment you think you've seen it all, you stop seeing what's new. And what's new is where danger hides. Markets change, people change, rules change. If your thinking doesn't update, experience becomes a liability. That's why some experienced people make catastrophic mistakes. They trusted old patterns in a new environment. Experience didn't save them. Reflection would have. You don't need their permission to question your instincts. You don't need approval to update your approach. You don't need validation to admit you've been repeating patterns. You have a choice. Rely on habit or rely on analysis. Habit feels fast. Analysis feels slow. But slow thinking prevents fast failure. That's the key. Let me say this directly. If you want to grow faster than others, you must reflect more than others. Not work more, not hustle harder. Reflect deeper. Depth beats volume every time. Now here's the discipline you adopt going forward. After every meaningful action, you pause, not to judge, to learn. You ask, what did this teach me? If the answer is nothing, you failed to reflect. Do it again, because reflection is a skill, and like all skills, it improves with practice. Most people never practice it. That's why they plateau. You won't. You have a choice. You can let years pass, or you can let lessons compound. One ages you, the other upgrades you. Say it one last time. Experience without analysis is useless. If you remember that,
time will finally start working for you instead of against you. You've learned to stop protecting ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've learned to examine errors. You've learned the danger of appearances. You've embraced feedback. You've replaced blame with ownership. You've corrected small errors early. And now you understand why experience alone doesn't make you better. Good. Because once you combine experience with reflection, you're ready for something powerful. A system. Not motivation, not intention, a system for growth. You've learned why learning matters. Now it's time to build the tool that captures it.
Chapter 9. Create your personal black box. Winners don't rely on memory. They rely on systems. They don't hope they'll remember what went wrong. They record it. They don't guess how to improve. They review. Say it clearly. Review, adjust, repeat. That's the key. Every high-performing system on Earth has a black box. Not to assign blame, not to protect ego, to learn. And if you don't build one for your own life, you are leaving growth to chance. Chance is not a strategy. You have a choice. You can drift through life reacting, or you can run your life like a system that improves itself. One repeats mistakes. The other compounds progress. Here's the truth most people miss. Learning does not happen in the moment of action. It happens after. Action creates data. Review creates insight. Without review, action is wasted effort. Say it again. Review, adjust, repeat. That cycle is mastery. High performers don't wait for failure to review. They review everything. Wins, losses, near misses, small decisions. Because patterns hide in small moments, and patterns decide outcomes. That's the key. Most people think journaling is emotional. It's not. Journaling is operational. It's not about feelings. It's about facts. What did I do? What happened? Why did it happen? That's not therapy. That's engineering. And you must start treating your life like an engineered system. You don't need their permission to track your decisions. You don't need validation to write things down. You don't need approval to audit yourself. You have a choice. Let's talk about what a personal black box actually is. It's a simple record of reality, not polished, not dramatic, not defensive, just accurate. A place where excuses are not allowed. A place where ego doesn't enter. Only truth. Because truth improves performance, ego protects comfort, and comfort is expensive. Here's why memory fails you. Memory edits. Memory justifies. Memory forgets inconvenient details. Your brain is designed to protect identity, not accuracy. That's why written review matters. Paper doesn't care how you feel. It records what happened, and what happened is all that matters. Say it again. Review, adjust, repeat. Now let's make this practical. Your personal black box has 3 components. 1. Capture. You capture decisions and outcomes. Not everything, only what matters. Important conversations, major decisions, noticeable failures, unexpected wins. If it mattered, it gets logged. 2. Analyze. You ask simple questions. What did I expect? What actually happened? What caused the gap? No emotion, no self-attack, just mechanics. 3. Adjust. You change one behavior, not 10, 1. Because small adjustments compound. That's the key. This process doesn't take hours, it takes minutes, but those minutes save years. Most people won't do this. They'll say they're too busy. Busy doing what? Repeating the same mistakes? That's not productivity, that's motion. You have a choice. Build a system or stay trapped in reaction. Now let's talk about consistency. Review once helps. Review daily transforms. Winners review relentlessly, not because they're obsessive, because they're intentional. They don't wait for motivation, they schedule review.
Discipline beats motivation every time. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to reflect daily, discipline to log errors, discipline to update behavior. Here's where people sabotage themselves. They turn review into self-criticism. That's a mistake. Criticism attacks identity. Review improves systems. Your black box is not a place for insults. No, I'm stupid. No, I always mess up. Only facts. I did X. It led to Y. Next time I will do Z. That's it. That's mastery language. Say it again. Review, adjust, repeat. Let me be clear. If you don't review your decisions, you are relying on luck, and luck runs out. Systems don't. That's why this chapter matters. This is where thinking turns into structure. You've learned principles, now you're building infrastructure. Infrastructure is what carries you when motivation fades. Here's another hard truth. You don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems. If your system is chaos, your results will be chaotic. If your system is disciplined, your results will be consistent. That's the key. You don't need a fancy app. You don't need complex tools. A notebook works. A document works. What matters is honesty. No hiding, no excuses. Because your black box is private. It's not for display, it's for growth. You don't need their permission to be honest with yourself. You don't need validation to improve in silence. You don't need approval to become dangerous quietly. You have a choice. Now let's address resistance. Your ego will fight this. It will say, "You already know this. This isn't necessary. You'll remember." That's a lie. If knowing was enough, you'd already be where you want to be. Recording forces clarity. Clarity forces action. That's the chain, and chains create strength. Say it again. Review, adjust, repeat. Here's your non-negotiable rule from now on. No week ends without review. You sit down, you scan decisions, you identify patterns, you select one adjustment. One. That's discipline. And discipline compounds. One small correction per week equals 50 upgrades per year. Most people don't improve that much in a decade. You will, because you built a system. You've learned to stop protecting ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've learned to examine errors. You've embraced feedback. You've replaced blame with ownership. You've corrected small errors early. You've combined experience with reflection. Now you've built your personal black box. Good. Because once you can review and adjust consistently, you unlock something rare. Control. Not control over others, control over yourself. And self-control is where real power begins. You've built the engine. Now it's time to talk about how to use it daily without burning out. You've mastered review. Now let's talk about replacing excuses with action.
Chapter 10. Replace excuses with experiments. Excuses feel intelligent. They sound reasonable. They protect your pride. And they quietly destroy your progress. Excuses explain why you didn't act. Experiments show you what works. Say it clearly. Test everything, defend nothing. That's the key. Most people live their lives like performances. They try to look good. They try to avoid mistakes. They try to protect their image. High performers live their lives like experiments. They try things. They measure results. They adjust without emotion. That's why they improve faster. You have a choice. You can defend your reasons, or you can test your assumptions. One protects feelings. The other produces results. Here's the brutal truth. Every excuse is a hidden decision, a decision to stay the same. I don't have time. It's not the right moment. I need more information. I'm not ready yet. Those aren't explanations, they're delays, and delay is expensive. Because life doesn't reward explanations, it rewards outcomes. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. Defending means arguing for why you're right. Testing means finding out what's true. Defending locks you into identity. Testing frees you to learn. That's the key. Let's break this down. Excuses are emotional. Experiments are mechanical. Excuses focus on comfort. Experiments focus on data. Excuses protect ego. Experiments upgrade systems. And systems always beat emotion. You don't need their permission to test a new approach. You don't need validation to try something small. You don't need approval to stop defending your past decisions. You have a choice. Most people waste energy explaining why something won't work. High performers spend energy finding out if it will. Same situation, different mindset, different result. That's the difference between stagnation and growth. Let me be direct. If you are explaining more than you're testing, you are stuck. Explanations don't move you forward. Actions do. But here's where people get confused. They think experimenting means risking everything. It doesn't. Experiments are small, controlled, low ego. You don't gamble your life, you test variables. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to try small changes. Discipline to measure honestly. Discipline to drop what doesn't work. Now let's talk about fear. People defend because they're afraid of being wrong. But in an experiment, being wrong is useful. Wrong results still give data. Failure in an experiment is success in learning. That mindset changes everything. If you treat life like a performance, mistakes embarrass you. If you treat life like a test, mistakes inform you. That's the key. Here's a rule you must adopt immediately. No opinion without a test. If you believe something works, test it. If you believe something doesn't work, test it. Beliefs without testing are assumptions. Assumptions without testing are limitations. High performers don't argue beliefs, they test them. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. Defending keeps you stuck in the past. Testing moves you into the future. Now let's get practical. Whenever you catch yourself making an excuse, pause. Ask one question. What experiment would prove or disprove this? Not a big experiment, a small one. One action, one variable, 1 week. That's it. For example, I don't have time. Test waking up 30 minutes earlier for 5 days. I'm not good at this. Test practicing for 10 minutes daily for 1 week. This won't work for me. Test it on a small scale and measure results. No drama, no commitment forever, just data. That's how progress actually happens. Most people never do this. They argue internally, they rationalize, they defend, and nothing changes. You have a choice. Argue with reality or test against it. Reality always wins arguments, but it rewards experiments. That's the key. Let's address perfectionism. Perfectionism is just another excuse. It sounds ambitious. It's actually avoidance. I want to do it right. Translation, I don't want to be judged. Experiments don't need perfection. They need honesty. If you wait for perfect conditions, you will never test. And if you never test, you never learn. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. Now let's talk about identity. When you defend, you tie your identity to an idea. If the idea fails, you feel attacked. When you experiment, the idea is separate from you. If it fails, you simply discard it. That separation is power. High performers don't identify with strategies. They identify with learning. That's why they pivot fast. You don't need their permission to change your mind. You don't need validation to drop a bad approach. You don't need approval to evolve. You have a choice. Here's another rule you must adopt. Results decide, not opinions. If something works, keep it. If it doesn't, change it. No ego, no attachment. Attachment is expensive. Flexibility is profitable. That's the key. Let me say this clearly. The world does not reward consistency of belief. It rewards accuracy of action. Accuracy only comes from testing, not from defending. Now here's the discipline most people avoid.
After every experiment, you review. What did I try? What happened? What will I adjust? That closes the loop. Experiment without review is chaos. Review without experiment is theory. You need both. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. This chapter is about dropping the need to be right. Rightness is irrelevant. Results matter. And results come from action. Small, frequent, honest. That's how winners think. You've learned to stop protecting your ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've learned to examine errors. You've embraced feedback. You've replaced blame with ownership. You've corrected small errors early. You've paired experience with reflection. You've built your personal black box. Now you've replaced excuses with experiments. Good. Because once you start experimenting, you'll notice something important. Your emotions start interfering less. Your reactions slow down. Your decisions become calmer. And that brings us to the next discipline you must master: control. Not control over outcomes, control over yourself. You've learned how to test. Now let's talk about mastering the internal environment where those tests happen.
Chapter 11. Emotional control unlocks learning. Emotion is fast. Learning is slow. And when emotion is in control, learning shuts down. Say it clearly. Control emotion. Access truth. That's the key. Most people don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they react. They feel first. They justify second. They learn never. Emotion distorts feedback. It bends reality to protect ego. And once reality is distorted, improvement becomes impossible. You have a choice. You can react emotionally, or you can respond strategically. One feels natural, the other builds mastery. Here's the hard truth. Every emotional reaction contaminates data. Anger edits facts. Defensiveness blocks insight. Embarrassment hides mistakes. Excitement exaggerates success. Emotion does not reveal truth. It filters it. That's why calm analysis always beats emotional reaction. Every time. Say it again. Control emotion. Access truth. High performers are not emotionless. They are disciplined. They feel the emotion, but they don't obey it. They pause. They slow down. They separate feeling from fact. That pause is power. That pause is where learning lives. Most people skip it. They react instantly. They speak quickly. They decide emotionally. And then they spend months cleaning up what could have been avoided in minutes. You don't need their permission to pause. You don't need validation to stay calm. You don't need approval to think before reacting. You have a choice. Let's be direct. If feedback makes you angry, you won't hear it. If failure makes you ashamed, you'll hide it. If criticism makes you defensive, you'll reject it. And rejected feedback teaches nothing. Emotion turns feedback into a threat. Calm turns feedback into information. That's the key. Now understand this. Emotional reactions feel justified. They feel automatic. They feel real. But feels real does not mean is useful. Learning requires accuracy, not intensity. Accuracy only comes from calm observation. This is why emotional control is not optional. It is a prerequisite for growth. Say it again. Control emotion. Access truth. Here's how emotion sabotages learning. When something goes wrong, emotion asks, how do I feel about this? Learning asks, what does this teach? Those questions lead to completely different outcomes. One protects identity, the other upgrades behavior. Most people protect identity. That's why most people don't improve. You won't make that mistake. You have a choice. Now let's talk about the myth of venting. People say venting helps them process. It doesn't. Venting amplifies emotion. It reinforces reaction. It locks in interpretation. You don't process emotion by expressing it loudly. You process it by calming it down. Clarity doesn't come from intensity. It comes from distance. That's the key. Here's a rule you must adopt.
No analysis while emotional, ever. If you're angry, you wait. If you're embarrassed, you wait. If you're excited, you wait. You do not review decisions in emotional states. Emotion biases conclusions. Instead, you pause until calm returns. Then you analyze. That discipline alone will put you ahead of most people. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to delay reaction. Discipline to regulate emotion. Discipline to choose truth over comfort. Most people think emotional control means suppression. It doesn't. Suppression hides emotion. Control directs it. You acknowledge the feeling, then you choose behavior anyway. That's maturity. That's power. Now let's get practical. When emotion spikes, you do 3 things. First, stop talking. Words spoken emotionally create permanent consequences. Second, slow your body. Deep breath. Relax shoulders. Stillness resets the nervous system. Third, label the emotion internally. I am angry. I am embarrassed. I am defensive. Labeling reduces intensity. Then, and only then, you ask learning questions. What happened? What triggered me? What information is here? That's how you turn emotion into insight. Say it again. Control emotion. Access truth. Let's talk about feedback again. Feedback delivered calmly is rare. Feedback received calmly is even rarer. Most people reject feedback not because it's wrong, but because it hurts. Pain is not proof of inaccuracy. It's proof of exposure. And exposure is necessary for growth. If feedback didn't sting, it wouldn't matter. But if you let the sting control you, you lose the lesson. That's the trade. You have a choice. Let the emotion run the conversation or extract the truth and move forward. One keeps you stuck. The other makes you dangerous. That's the key. Here's another hard truth. Emotional people learn slowly. Not because they're weak, because emotion blocks reflection. Calm people learn fast. They separate signal from noise. They don't take outcomes personally. They take them seriously. That difference compounds over time. Now let's address pride. Pride amplifies emotion. When pride is high, defensiveness is automatic. That's why earlier chapters mattered. You removed ego. You reframed failure. You embraced feedback. You built systems. All of that supports emotional control. Because emotional control is easier when identity is not at stake. If your identity is someone who learns, feedback doesn't threaten you. It informs you. That's the key. You don't need their permission to stay calm under pressure. You don't need validation to respond slowly. You don't need approval to be emotionally disciplined. You have a choice. Now let's talk about repetition. Every emotional overreaction trains your nervous system. You train it to spike, to defend, to react. Every calm response retrains it. You train patience, clarity, control. Training happens whether you notice or not. The question is what you're training. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline practiced daily becomes automatic. That's the goal. Automatic calm, automatic reflection, automatic learning. Let me say this directly. If you want to learn faster than others, you must react slower than others. Speed of reaction kills accuracy. Speed of analysis creates advantage. That's the key. Here's your assignment. The next time something triggers you, pause. Do nothing for 60 seconds. No talking, no typing, no reacting. Then ask one question. What is this teaching me? That pause will change everything, because learning cannot happen in chaos. It needs space. You've learned to experiment. You've learned to review. You've learned to correct. Now you've learned to control the internal environment where learning happens. Good, because emotional control unlocks learning. And once learning is unlocked, something becomes painfully obvious. Most people never improve, not because they can't, because they won't. They refuse discipline. You're ready to confront that truth next.
Chapter 12. Why most people never improve. Most people are not lazy. They're busy. They work hard. They try harder. They stay exhausted, and nothing changes. That's the trap. They confuse effort with progress. Say it clearly. Trying harder isn't learning better. That's the key. Effort feels productive. Sweat feels virtuous. Busyness feels like movement. But effort without correction is just repetition. And repetition of the wrong thing does not create improvement. It creates familiarity. Familiarity feels safe. Safety feels good. And growth dies there. You have a choice. You can keep doing what's familiar, or you can fix what's broken. One feels comfortable. The other creates results. Here's the hard truth. Most people repeat what they already know, even when it doesn't work. They don't stop to ask, is this effective? They ask, how can I do more of this? That question keeps them stuck. Because more of wrong is still wrong. Say it again. Trying harder isn't learning better. High performers don't push harder blindly. They adjust intelligently. They don't increase effort until they improve method. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness. It's about discipline. Discipline to stop. Discipline to question. Discipline to change approach. Most people avoid fixing what's broken because it threatens identity. If you admit something isn't working, you must admit you were wrong. Ego hates that. So people double down. They add hours, they add intensity, they add pressure, and the results stay the same. That's not perseverance, that's avoidance. You don't need their permission to change methods. You don't need validation to stop repeating mistakes. You don't need approval to admit something isn't working. You have a choice. Let's be very clear. Hard work is not the problem. Unexamined work is. Most people work hard at the wrong things for a very long time. They get tired, they get bitter, they get cynical, and then they say, I tried. No, you repeated. Trying implies testing, learning, and adjusting. Repeating implies comfort. Say it again. Trying harder isn't learning better. Now, let's talk about familiarity. Familiar actions feel efficient because you don't have to think. Thinking is uncomfortable. Thinking exposes gaps, so people avoid it. They stick to routines that no longer serve them because those routines feel safe. Safe does not mean effective. Safe means unchanged, and unchanged means stuck. That's the key. High performers constantly ask one uncomfortable question. What am I avoiding fixing? That question points directly to growth. Low performers ask, how can I stay consistent? Consistency is useless if the method is wrong. Consistency only matters after correction. You have a choice. Consistency with comfort or consistency with improvement. Now let's address another illusion. People believe time will fix things. It won't. Time only amplifies patterns. If your pattern is flawed, time makes it worse. If your pattern is disciplined, time makes it powerful. That's why experience alone doesn't improve people. Reflection does. And reflection requires you to break routine. Most people refuse to do that. They'd rather stay busy than be accurate. Busyness hides failure. Accuracy exposes it. Say it again. Trying harder isn't learning better. Here's a simple diagnostic. If you've been working hard for months with no change in results, you are not learning. Learning always shows up in outcomes, not immediately, but measurably. If outcomes are flat, method is wrong, not effort, method. That's the key. Now, let's talk about fixing what's broken. Fixing requires honesty. Honesty requires discomfort, so people avoid it. They polish strengths instead of repairing weaknesses. They say, I'll just lean into what I'm good at. That works until reality demands the skill you avoided. Then the gap hurts. High performers do the opposite. They attack weaknesses early, not emotionally, strategically. They know weaknesses compound if ignored. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to stop, discipline to question, discipline to change approach. Most people chase novelty instead. New tools, new plans, new motivation. None of that fixes broken systems. Only correction does. You don't need their permission to fix fundamentals. You don't need validation to slow down and rebuild. You don't need approval to start again properly. You have a choice. Now, let's talk about the most common mistake. People ask, how can I be more motivated? Wrong question. Motivation doesn't fix broken processes. Processes fix motivation. When systems work, motivation follows. When systems fail, motivation disappears. That's the key. High performers don't chase motivation, they refine systems. They change inputs, they adjust feedback, they correct execution. Then results improve, and improved results create motivation. Reverse the order and you fail. Say it again. Trying harder isn't learning better. Now here's the behavior you must stop immediately. Stop adding effort to a method you haven't reviewed. Stop saying, I'll push through when the approach is wrong. Stop measuring success by exhaustion. Exhaustion is not evidence of progress. Results are. Here's the behavior you must start. After every period of effort, you review. What worked? What didn't? What will I change? No review means no learning. No learning means no improvement. It's that simple. That's the key. Let me be direct. If you are proud of how hard you work but frustrated by your results, this chapter is for you. Your pride is misplaced. Pride belongs to improvement, not effort. Effort is just input. Output is what matters. You have a choice. You can keep measuring yourself by how tired you are or by how effective you've become. One feeds ego, the other builds mastery. Now let's bring this home. Most people never improve because improvement requires humility. Humility to admit something isn't working. Humility to change direction. Humility to start fixing instead of repeating. They'd rather feel competent than become competent. You won't make that mistake. Say it one last time. Trying harder isn't learning better. Learning better requires reflection, correction, discipline. You've learned to stop protecting ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've examined errors. You've learned the danger of appearances. You've embraced feedback. You've replaced blame with ownership. You've corrected small errors early. You've combined experience with reflection. You've built your personal black box. You've replaced excuses with experiments. You've learned emotional control. Now you understand why most people never improve. Good, because once you see this clearly, something changes. You stop chasing effort, you start chasing effectiveness. And effectiveness thrives in one specific environment: silence, focus, privacy. You've mastered correction. Now it's time to master where correction happens best.
Chapter 13. Progress is built in private. Most people want progress to be visible. They want credit early. They want recognition fast. And that desire slows them down. Because real improvement doesn't happen on a stage, it happens in silence. Say it clearly, fix quietly, win loudly. That's the key. Public image feels important. Private growth is important. The more energy you spend managing how you look, the less energy you have to fix how you perform. That's not opinion, that's physics. Attention is limited. You have a choice. You can perform for applause, or you can build skill in private. One feeds ego, the other builds power. Here's the truth most people never accept. The need to be seen interferes with the need to improve. When you work in public, you defend your image. When you work in private, you attack your weaknesses. Those two behaviors cannot coexist. That's the key. Public accountability is overrated. Private discipline is underrated. Public accountability pressures you to look consistent. Private discipline gives you permission to experiment. And experimentation is how growth actually happens. Say it again. Fix quietly. Win loudly. High performers understand this. They disappear when they need to rebuild. They go quiet when they need to correct.
They stop talking when it's time to work. Then they reappear with results. Low performers do the opposite. They announce plans, they share intentions, they explain strategies, and they feel productive without producing anything. You don't need their permission to work in silence. You don't need validation to stop announcing your goals. You don't need approval to build privately. You have a choice. Let's talk about why public work slows growth. When people are watching, you avoid mistakes. When you avoid mistakes, you avoid learning. You choose safe actions over effective ones. Private work removes that pressure. In private, you can fail fast. In private, you can test aggressively. In private, you can be honest. Honesty is the fuel of improvement. Public performance replaces honesty with appearance. That's the trade. Say it again. Fix quietly, win loudly. Now let's talk about applause. Applause feels rewarding, but it's premature. Applause before results creates complacency. Your brain gets the reward before the work is done, and once rewarded, effort drops. That's neuroscience. That's why announcing goals often reduces follow-through. You get the dopamine early. Private work delays reward. Delayed reward builds discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to work without witnesses. Discipline to improve without praise. Discipline to stay focused when no one is watching. Most people can't do that. That's why most people don't improve. They need external validation to move. You don't. You have a choice. Let's be very clear. Progress is not social. Progress is solitary. Skill is built alone. Mastery is trained in isolation. Teams win games, but individuals train alone. You lift the weight alone. You study alone. You reflect alone. That's where growth happens. Say it again. Fix quietly. Win loudly. Now let's address a misconception. Working in private does not mean hiding forever. It means timing visibility correctly. You don't hide results. You hide process. Process is messy. Results are clean. Share results. Protect process. That distinction matters. When you expose process, you invite opinion. Opinion interferes with learning. When you protect process, you stay focused. That's the key. Here's a rule you adopt from now on. No broadcasting while building. No announcing habits. No sharing experiments. No explaining changes. You let results speak, because results end arguments. Now let's talk about ego again. Ego wants witnesses. Discipline wants progress. Ego wants to be admired. Discipline wants to be effective. When ego leads, growth slows. When discipline leads, results accelerate. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to stay quiet. Discipline to resist attention. Discipline to delay validation. Here's why this matters. Private work allows radical honesty. You can admit weaknesses without fear. You can confront gaps without embarrassment. You can restart without explanation. That freedom is rare. Most people never experience it because they are always on, always posting, always explaining, always reacting. Noise kills focus. Silence sharpens it. Say it again. Fix quietly. Win loudly. Let's get practical. Identify one area of your life where you've been talking more than working. Fitness, career, learning, discipline. Stop talking about it. For the next 30 days, say nothing. No updates, no announcements, no hints, just work. That silence will do more for you than motivation ever could. Because silence removes pressure. Pressure creates defensiveness. Defensiveness blocks learning. Silence creates space.
Space allows correction. That's the key. Now let's talk about consistency. Private work builds consistency because there's no audience to impress. You don't perform, you practice. Practice is repetitive, boring, unsexy. That's why it works. Performance is exciting, flashy, short-lived. That's why it fails. High performers practice, low performers perform. You choose. You have a choice. Another truth. When you work privately, you stop comparing. Comparison is toxic to progress. It distracts, it demoralizes, it distorts priorities. Private work keeps you focused on one thing, your next correction. That's all that matters. Say it again. Fix quietly, win loudly. Now let's address fear. Some people avoid private work because it removes excuses. When no one is watching, you can't blame distraction. You can't blame pressure. You can't blame opinion. It's just you and the work. Good. Fear is a signal. It shows you where growth is hiding, and growth never hides in comfort. You've learned to stop protecting ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've examined errors early. You've learned the danger of appearances. You've embraced feedback. You've replaced blame with ownership. You've corrected small errors early. You've combined experience with reflection. You've built your personal black box. You've replaced excuses with experiments. You've mastered emotional control. You've seen why most people never improve. Now you understand where improvement actually happens. In private, in silence, without applause. Good. Because once you build privately, something powerful happens. When results finally show, they look sudden. People call it luck. They call it talent. They call it overnight success. They don't see the quiet years. You will. You know better. You've learned to fix quietly. Now it's time to learn how to extract maximum value from every setback. Not by talking, by acting. You're almost there. You've built the foundation. Now let's talk about extracting maximum value from every setback.
Chapter 10. Replace excuses with experiments. Excuses feel intelligent. They sound reasonable. They protect your pride. And they quietly destroy your progress. Excuses explain why you didn't act. Experiments show you what works. Say it clearly. Test everything, defend nothing. That's the key. Most people live their lives like performances. They try to look good. They try to avoid mistakes. They try to protect their image. High performers live their lives like experiments. They try things. They measure results. They adjust without emotion. That's why they improve faster. You have a choice. You can defend your reasons, or you can test your assumptions. One protects feelings. The other produces results. Here's the brutal truth. Every excuse is a hidden decision, a decision to stay the same. I don't have time. It's not the right moment. I need more information. I'm not ready yet. Those aren't explanations, they're delays, and delay is expensive. Because life doesn't reward explanations, it rewards outcomes. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. Defending means arguing for why you're right. Testing means finding out what's true. Defending locks you into identity. Testing frees you to learn. That's the key. Let's break this down. Excuses are emotional. Experiments are mechanical. Excuses focus on comfort. Experiments focus on data. Excuses protect ego. Experiments upgrade systems. And systems always beat emotion. You don't need their permission to test a new approach. You don't need validation to try something small. You don't need approval to stop defending your past decisions. You have a choice. Most people waste energy explaining why something won't work. High performers spend energy finding out if it will. Same situation, different mindset, different result. That's the difference between stagnation and growth. Let me be direct. If you are explaining more than you're testing, you are stuck. Explanations don't move you forward. Actions do. But here's where people get confused. They think experimenting means risking everything. It doesn't. Experiments are small, controlled, low ego. You don't gamble your life, you test variables. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness, it's about discipline. Discipline to try small changes. Discipline to measure honestly. Discipline to drop what doesn't work. Now let's talk about fear. People defend because they're afraid of being wrong. But in an experiment, being wrong is useful. Wrong results still give data. Failure in an experiment is success in learning. That mindset changes everything. If you treat life like a performance, mistakes embarrass you. If you treat life like a test, mistakes inform you. That's the key. Here's a rule you must adopt immediately. No opinion without a test. If you believe something works, test it. If you believe something doesn't work, test it. Beliefs without testing are assumptions. Assumptions without testing are limitations. High performers don't argue beliefs, they test them. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. Defending keeps you stuck in the past. Testing moves you into the future. Now let's get practical. Whenever you catch yourself making an excuse, pause. Ask one question. What experiment would prove or disprove this? Not a big experiment, a small one. One action, one variable, 1 week. That's it. For example, I don't have time. Test waking up 30 minutes earlier for 5 days. I'm not good at this. Test practicing for 10 minutes daily for 1 week. This won't work for me. Test it on a small scale and measure results. No drama, no commitment forever, just data. That's how progress actually happens. Most people never do this. They argue internally, they rationalize, they defend, and nothing changes. You have a choice. Argue with reality or test against it. Reality always wins arguments, but it rewards experiments. That's the key. Let's address perfectionism. Perfectionism is just another excuse. It sounds ambitious. It's actually avoidance. I want to do it right. Translation, I don't want to be judged. Experiments don't need perfection. They need honesty. If you wait for perfect conditions, you will never test. And if you never test, you never learn. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. Now let's talk about identity. When you defend, you tie your identity to an idea. If the idea fails, you feel attacked. When you experiment, the idea is separate from you. If it fails, you simply discard it. That separation is power. High performers don't identify with strategies. They identify with learning. That's why they pivot fast. You don't need their permission to change your mind. You don't need validation to drop a bad approach. You don't need approval to evolve. You have a choice. Here's another rule you must adopt. Results decide, not opinions. If something works, keep it. If it doesn't, change it. No ego, no attachment. Attachment is expensive. Flexibility is profitable. That's the key. Let me say this clearly. The world does not reward consistency of belief. It rewards accuracy of action. Accuracy only comes from testing, not from defending. Now here's the discipline most people avoid. After every experiment, you review. What did I try? What happened? What will I adjust? That closes the loop. Experiment without review is chaos. Review without experiment is theory. You need both. Say it again. Test everything, defend nothing. This chapter is about dropping the need to be right. Rightness is irrelevant. Results matter. And results come from action. Small, frequent, honest. That's how winners think. You've learned to stop protecting your ego. You've learned to treat failure as data. You've learned to examine errors. You've embraced feedback. You've replaced blame with ownership. You've corrected small errors early. You've paired experience with reflection.
You've built your personal black box. Now you've replaced excuses with experiments. Good. Because once you start experimenting, you'll notice something important. Your emotions start interfering less. Your reactions slow down. Your decisions become calmer. And that brings us to the next discipline you must master: control. Not control over outcomes, control over yourself. You've learned how to test. Now let's talk about mastering the internal environment where those tests happen.
Chapter 15. Make learning non-negotiable. Growth is not emotional. It is structural. Learning does not happen when you feel like it. It happens when it is required. Say it clearly. No reflection, no progress. That's the key. Most people treat learning like motivation. Optional. Mood-dependent. Convenient. That's why most people plateau. Learning must be non-negotiable, like brushing. Chapter 15. Make learning non-negotiable. Growth is not emotional. It is structural. Learning does not happen when you feel like it. It happens when it is required. Say it clearly. No reflection, no progress. That's the key. Most people treat learning like motivation. Optional. Mood-dependent. Convenient. That's why most people plateau. Learning must be non-negotiable, like brushing your teeth, like showing up to work, like paying rent. You don't debate it. You don't wait to feel inspired. You do it. You have a choice. You can make learning conditional, or you can make it automatic. One creates bursts of growth, the other creates a lifetime of improvement. Here's the hard truth. If learning depends on emotion, it will disappear under pressure. Stress kills curiosity. Fatigue kills reflection. Only systems survive pressure. That's why growth must be systematic, not emotional. Say it again. No reflection, no progress. Reflection is the toll you pay to move forward. If you don't pay it daily, progress stops. Not dramatically, quietly. That's how people get stuck without realizing it. They're still busy, still trying, still moving, just not improving. You don't need their permission to make learning a rule. You don't need validation to build systems. You don't need approval to stop relying on mood. You have a choice. Let's connect everything you've learned. You stopped protecting your ego. You learned failure is data. You examined errors. You rejected appearance over accuracy. You embraced feedback. You replaced blame with ownership. You corrected small errors early. You learned experience without reflection is useless. You built your personal black box. You replaced excuses with experiments. You mastered emotional control. You worked in private. You turned loss into leverage. All of that collapses into one requirement: consistency. Not intensity, consistency. And consistency only exists when learning is non-negotiable. That's the key. Most people say, "I'll reflect when things slow down." They never do. Life doesn't slow down, so learning gets postponed indefinitely. Postponed learning becomes permanent stagnation. Say it again. No reflection, no progress. Learning must be scheduled, not hoped for, not remembered, scheduled. If it's not scheduled, it's optional. If it's optional, it won't happen. Here's the rule you adopt from now on. Every cycle ends with reflection. Every day, every week, every project, every failure, every win. No exceptions. No reflection, no progress. This rule removes debate. You don't argue with yourself anymore. You don't negotiate. You follow the rule. That's discipline. And remember, it's not about flawlessness. It's about discipline. Discipline to reflect when tired. Discipline to review when bored. Discipline to analyze when uncomfortable. Most people won't do this. That's why most people don't separate themselves. You will. You have a choice. Now let's talk about mood.
Mood is unreliable. Some days you feel sharp, some days you feel dull. Some days you feel motivated, some days you feel empty. If learning depends on mood, learning disappears half the time. Systems don't care about mood. Systems run. That's why elite performers don't ask, "Do I feel like reviewing?" They ask, "What does the system require?" And then they do it. That's the difference between amateurs and professionals. Say it again, no reflection, no progress. Now let's be practical. Your learning system needs 3 fixed points: a daily micro review, a weekly deep review, and a post-failure review. Daily, 1 decision, 1 result, 1 adjustment. Weekly, patterns, trends, corrections. After failure, immediate extraction, no delay. These are not optional. They are the cost of growth. Pay the cost or pay the price. You have a choice. Most people prefer the price. They pay with regret, with repetition, with wasted years. You won't. Now let's address resistance. Your mind will fight this. It will say, "You already know this. You're overthinking. Just move on." That voice is the enemy. That voice is comfort. Comfort has never built anything exceptional. Silence it with structure. Rules beat feelings. Say it again, no reflection, no progress. Let me say something important. Learning does not mean consuming more information, more books, more videos, more content. That's distraction disguised as growth. Learning means extracting lessons from your own actions. Your life is the curriculum. Your decisions are the material. Your outcomes are the exam. If you don't review them, you fail the course every year. That's the key. Now let's talk about identity. You are no longer someone who tries to improve. You are someone who reviews relentlessly. That identity changes behavior automatically. You don't wait for motivation. You don't chase inspiration. You follow process. Process creates results. Results reinforce identity. Identity stabilizes behavior. That loop is mastery. You don't need their permission to adopt this identity. You don't need validation to commit. You don't need approval to be disciplined. You have a choice. Now let's address the final illusion. People believe learning ends once they're good enough. That's the moment decline begins, because the world keeps changing. What worked yesterday becomes obsolete. Only continuous learners stay relevant. Learning is not a phase, it's a lifestyle. And lifestyles are built on rules, non-negotiable rules. Say it again, no reflection, no progress. This is the line you do not cross. No reflection, stop. No progress, don't expect results. You cannot skip the toll and reach the destination. Now let's bring this home. If everything you've heard in this audiobook became optional tomorrow, nothing would change. So it must not be optional. You must decide now that learning is required. Not when it's convenient, not when it's comfortable, every time. Because life doesn't grade effort, it grades outcomes. And outcomes belong to those who learn faster than others. That's the key. You have a choice. Live reactively or live deliberately. Repeat cycles or upgrade them. Protect ego or build mastery. Decide now. Make learning non-negotiable. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Because the moment reflection becomes optional, progress ends. And the moment learning becomes a rule, everything changes. Say it one final time. No reflection, no progress. This is not the end. This is the operating system. And from here forward, every failure will teach you. Every loss will strengthen you. Every year will compound. Because you chose discipline over emotion. And that choice changes everything. Here's the truth most people will never accept. You don't rise because you're talented. You rise because you learn faster than others. Every mistake you avoid looking at will control your future. Every mistake you study will upgrade it. Stop hiding, stop explaining, stop protecting your ego. Build your own black box. Review your decisions, expose your errors, extract the lesson. Success isn't about being right, it's about being willing to be wrong long enough to get better. Your challenge is simple. Tonight, review one failure honestly. Write down what it taught you. Do that daily, and you will become unstoppable. Decide now. Learn or repeat the same life forever. Subscribe now. Discipline beats motivation, and this channel trains discipline.